Welcome back, everybody, to the podcast, Metacognition Mondays with me, Antony Lowe. I'm your host for the Metacognition of Leadership Institute, where we make the complex simple. You can find us at hetmolly.com. I also have the Physio Detective, My PT Education, the Diastasis Project, and the Women's Health Podcast. So my details are there on the screen for you as well. All right. We are still in season 1. This is episode 3. So season 1 is the foundations of metacognition. And episode 3, we are covering metacognitive regulation in action. So today we're going to be thinking about the fact that, good clinicians don't just act. They think about their thinking before, during, and after each encounter. We explore the regulatory process of planning, mentoring, and evaluating to refine clinical reasoning. So we're going to cover 3 points today. The first one will be planning your approach. The second one will be monitoring your clinical actions. And the third one will be evaluating what worked. So let's get started. Planning your action. Planning is the phase where you think ahead about what to do and how to do it. So in clinical contexts, what that means is that you'll be reviewing key case details before seeing a patient, anticipating possible responses to interventions, choosing assessment or communication strategies based on the patient presentation. Now, I do want to stress that I do this for subsequent appointments. For the initial assessment, before I've seen the patient, I might read their initial assessment form if they've filled it out. I might look at some of the questionnaires that if they've filled them out. I might look at emails or text messages or radiology reports, but I do so with a lens of making sure that I know that they exist there, but not to predetermine what is wrong with the person. I think in the initial assessment, it's much more important to listen to their story and get things from their point of view and find out what's important from them, as well as any other information that I've got. I do second opinion type work. So I'll get letters from doctors and, other physical therapists. And so they all have their own opinion of what's going on. But if the person isn't getting better, I need to look over these with a eye of, okay, what else has been possibly missed? Sometimes it really is just reinforcing what we know. And other times it's like, oh, this is obviously missed. So I want to make sure that your plan and your thinking for an initial assessment doesn't feel like what you would do in a subsequent assessment, because on a subsequent assessment, we've already done things. So I'll read the notes again. I use an AI app for my note-taking, so I've got all of that organized. The notes are much nicer than my usual handwritten notes. So that review is a very different review. It's a reminder of, okay, this is what we did. This is what we looked at. These are the key changes that were made. These are the key things that we're using as benchmarks to see if they're progressing towards their goals or not. So that's what I think. It's the planning is important. The planning goes ahead, but the planning is very different depending on the context. So planning does help prioritize time, effort, and cognitive resources. And it's important to acknowledge that in prioritizing the time, it's spending time. So you can spend, like I had to spend an hour reviewing a new patient because there was 8 years of extensive history right there. And it would be unfair not to spend that time while they're there. So they knew that I was going to bill them for a 1-hour review because there was just so much documentation to go through. And that's okay. That's okay, because everybody knows. So that's part of it there. But by doing that review, I was able to really just be able to sit and listen and see how all those different pieces might fit in their story, and then be able to say, oh, did you have a review about that abdominal scan that I noted? And they go, oh, yeah, forgot to tell you about that. And then that sets off more for them to talk about. So, in doing that, it makes sure that the subjective is more complete because I do know some information, but I'm letting them tell me. Reflective questions, they do help to guide planning. What do I already know about this case? What strategy might work best here? What am I assuming and how can I test that? And these are really important questions to ask. Um, you know, every time I see a certain statement, I have this from C23. I've got a C23 headache. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, we'll see, because that's something I need to test, right? They might say, well, I think I've got this type of muscle problem. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we definitely have to test that assumption or that belief. So all of these questions crop up from things that I read. The more uncertainty there is, the less questions that I have because the uncertainty is the question. The more certain people are about things, or the more definitive people say things are. For example, there's a very narrow foramina in the spine causing impingement of the right L4 nerve root. My immediate thought is, I wonder what that looks like clinically. These are the things that you can do if you have time to plan. And as you practice, and we'll talk about this in later episodes, these are also the things that you can do on the fly when you practice. So a strong plan does build cognitive readiness and adaptability. It also includes preparing to pivot, which is super important. It's not just scripting to a fixed agenda. And this is what I was trying to warn about earlier. Because if you think, okay, I've got a shoulder examination, so I've got to do all these range of motion, I'm going to do all these special tests, and I'm going to do all of these, muscle strength testing. Cool, that's good. You can do that. But having that plan means that you can pivot. A strong plan allows you to pivot. So you've got to have a plan so that the plan can be thrown out the window. In the military, I believe there's a saying that goes, no plan survives contact with the enemy, because something always changes, but it's good to have a plan anyway. So the second key point we're going to talk about today is monitoring your clinical actions. So monitoring your clinical actions, monitoring is that ability to observe your own thinking while you're doing the task. So planning is before you see the person. Now we're talking about during, and this is what I was alluding to before. It's a form of real-time self-checking. So while you're in the moment, you're checking. So what does it look like in the clinic? Noticing when your strategy doesn't work. You could be doing something, and I've spoken about it. My plan while doing anything is it the same, better, worse, or different? This is really, really important because that simple plan has helped my mental load immensely, and it allows me to pivot in the moment. So in the clinic, it might also look like realizing that you're making assumptions. So I will literally tell the patient to hold myself accountable. They'll be sitting there. They will have finished their subjective examination. We've finished all the questions. I'm now going to go examine them to find out what's going on and what's happening, what things look like. And I'll tell them, I think I know what's going on with you. And because I think I know what's going on with you, I'm actually going to examine other things to see if I'm wrong. And this is super important because I was taught that your objective examination was to see if you were right. And that's the wrong way to go about it. I think you need to prove yourself wrong, not prove yourself right. It's always easy to find things to find the evidence that's going to support what you think. So if I find myself making assumptions, then I know that I need to go test them. Another thing that you might notice is you're distracted or you're emotionally reactive. And if you notice these things are happening, whether it's empathy for the patient, like they go through some terrible things, or if I'm like, oh my goodness, they're talking a lot, that might be a time to self-check, reset, and get back into what you're supposed to be doing. And it happens to the best of us. I'm not going to lie. It's happened to me. And the way that I deal with it, when I have distractions or emotionally reactive, is I tell them. I say, wow, I'm getting distracted by this. Can we just go back to this for a second? I want to hear about it because that's why that's why we got into it. But I need to get into this. If I find that I'm emotionally reactive, I've got to ask myself, am I putting myself in their shoes too much to try and understand and to sit back out again? So these key skills are things like cognitive spot checks. Am I rushing this? Am I taking too long on this? Why am I spending so much time on this? Managing uncertainty or ambiguity without shutting down. Being able to manage that uncertainty is so important. And once I got comfortable with the uncertainty, life just got a lot better. People seem to like, and any of you who disagree, comment below, but people seem to like that I'm confident about uncertainty. That gives them confidence. Whereas if you're uncertain about the uncertainty, people just don't trust you. But I'm okay with being uncertain, and people appreciate that. I was talking to a patient recently about how they'd seen somebody and the person got basically mad at them because they weren't getting better. And what that means is, like, I think that therapist felt like they were failing and they're supposed to be fixing, and the person's not getting better. And so the person felt like the therapist took it out on them because they weren't getting better. And the person realized that it's probably a bit of projection. They didn't go back. And to recognize as a therapist, if I'm getting emotionally reactive that way, okay, I've got to be able to manage that. I've got to do that without shutting down. Adjusting course mid-conversation or mid-treatment. If you think that, okay, this is what we're going to be doing, and then something crops up, what's your plan? What's your alternate plan? Now, I've noticed when teaching people to think and behave this way, sometimes it helps to write these things down ahead of time so that you know what to do. And as you get better at it, as you get more repetitions of pivoting mid-treatment or having to change things, it'll be like shifting gears in a manual car. It'll just become easy. People won't notice. It just happens. But just like teaching my son in a manual car recently, when they're first learning, yeah, it's a little bit bouncy and hoppy while they get used to the clutch point and the coordination required. Experienced clinicians will do this intuitively because we've had enough repetitions. But like I've said in previous episodes, if we can make it visible, if we can break it down, we can teach it. And if we can teach it and we can understand it, we know it. And that's the benefit. So, understanding that your patient responses will help recalibrate your approach. This is the feedback loop that we'll be talking about in later episodes. It's being able to jive with them. I play music poorly. If you were to rate my musical ability, with 0 being unable to play an instrument, like make terrible noise, out of tune, and be able to be the world's best at a particular instrument at 10, I would rate myself at like a 2 or a 3. There are kids that play better than me. I mean, 5-year-old kids that play better than me. And I'm okay with that. I understand more musical theory than I have musical ability. Uh, and yet, I know how to respond. I can hear when the piano ups its intensity, and I match that. I play the saxophone, and I notice when things calm down a bit, or the rest of the band is slowing down, or decreasing the volume, or playing less notes. I match the same energy as well. This is the same type of dance. It could be dancing with a partner. It's about responding and being led and leading. This is what I mean by utilizing those patient responses to recalibrate my approach. So, we've monitored the clinical actions. We've planned that approach. We've monitored what's going on with the clinical actions. So now we've got to evaluate what worked. So evaluation happens after the clinical interaction, and it's where the true growth happens. So afterwards, you get time to think. If you get time to think, I'll talk about that. So it does involve asking, did my strategy work? Did they get better? Did they get worse? Did they stay the same? Did a different symptom crop up? What would I change next time? Like, that's important too. What would I change next time? And then what can I learn from this outcome or experience? What can I learn from this outcome or experience? Now, if you did this for every patient, it would be amazing, but I know from experience, you'll be completely overwhelmed. So I personally, I think that if you're writing notes or reviewing notes before you're seeing the next patient, just think of one of those things, just one of those things, and do the monitoring your clinical actions in real time. I think this is more practical. And then, evaluate later. And the reason why is that if you did it for all the patients, let's just say you have an 8-hour day, half an hour per person. If you're lucky, I know some people work at 15 and 20 minutes. It's ridiculous. I think it's doable, but you need other people to be helping you, I think, if you're going to do the type of work that I do, right? If you're just moving around, making sure people are doing the breathing exercises, it's completely different. So take that time, find out what's going on with them. So examples of evaluation in practice: reflecting after a session during documentation, like I just said, discussing cases with peers or mentors. I want you to know that you can always put in the comments cases, anonymous cases. Please don't put anything specific. And I will always be happy to answer. So you can DM me, you can comment on my Instagram or Facebook, you can email me, you can comment on this video and share some cases or share some examples of when you did some metacognitive reflection, when you did some of these things like planning your approach, monitoring your clinical actions, and evaluating what worked. It's really, really helpful to do that. And I know that some people are out there and they don't have another physical therapist around for 100 miles, or they may not have a collaborative environment with other practices where, it's that scarcity mentality where you're all fighting for the same pool of patients. I think being able to have somebody you can ask is important. And I've appreciated being able to ask different therapists and educators over the years, just emailing them or messaging them or calling them. And I want to provide that for people too. So please feel free. Reviewing your teaching approach post-lecture. This is important too. After every course, I'm a bit of a feedback fiend. I want to know what people thought, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, because I want to get better too. I'm not standing there teaching to just get information out there. I'm teaching so that I remember what to do and how to become better at teaching and how to become better at speaking, how to become better at being a better clinician and learning from the people that I'm interacting with. It's an interaction. In fact, I find this podcast really strange and I'm talking to nobody. I would love to record this live so that we can have discussion or I can see comments. So reviewing your approach after something happens is really, really important to me. Now, if you don't do evaluation, there is a downside. And the downside is that you may repeat mistakes and successes may go unrecognized. We have to decide, as much as I don't like judging, because, judging is not cool, we do kind of judge, right? Binary judgments are really difficult, but they're really easy. They're difficult because people don't fit into yes or no, right? There's scales. And it's really easy because the grouping is easy. It's an easy decision, this side or that side. One example, I was talking to a patient recently, and I was asking them, because it was very early on in our therapeutic relationship, I was asking them, are you the type of person that tends to push through when you get symptoms? Now, it is a leading question because everything they'd told me so far was that they push through regardless of the symptoms. It's like being a martyr. It's like having pain science education applied poorly. It's like they just push through because they think that it's better for them and they're getting worse. It's like, well, it's not helping. So how about you stop? So that downside is that if you don't recognize that the person pushes through, you may give them exercises which can make them worse. And so for those people, I prescribe exercises very differently. Whereas there are people who are very fear avoidant and any sort of sign of pain, they tend to stop. And so my approach for them is very different. And so in this reflective exercise, evaluating what worked, have a think about whether your approach to them was helpful, because if you don't, you might miss it when you don't evaluate. You might miss when they're making things worse because they might downplay how much they flared up that week. And they might downplay their successes. I've had a few people recently come back and tell me that they're not better. And I'm like, okay, like you're not better. Like I have no evidence to disbelieve them, to not believe them. And so we get into the objective and I say, okay, move. And so when they do the movements, if it's a shoulder, I don't know why. My routine is I always start with forward flexion once we've done the functional activities. And I look, and then I just double check my notes, and it's like, it looks like you're going further because you can reach this angle now, and last week you could get this angle only. And they go, oh yeah, I suppose that has improved. I've noticed that I can reach up further. If we don't review with them and we don't review after, we don't plan before and we don't monitor during, we may miss those successes as well. And you may miss it too. So in your post treatment evaluation, have a think about that too. Now, you can do formal methods of evaluating reflection. So things like reflection journals, team debriefs, end of day case reviews. I used to do a weekly case review with my staff. They would have half an hour a week with me, and I'd ask them how they're going, if there's anything that they had issues with, any clients that they had issues with, and they would provide me cases on how they're going. Or if they didn't have anybody, I'd literally just open up the diary and we'll just go through and I'd ask them about these people and what's going on with them. It's very, very quick, but that ability to have that case review process formally there was important. So evaluation is also the key to improving your planning for next time. it completes that feedback loop. So super important that you do that. So in summary, we have covered metacognitive regulation in action. So what that looks like is planning your approach, monitoring your clinical actions, and evaluating what worked. My call to action is to use a 3-question reflection. This week, I would love for you to ask yourself, what's my plan? How am I doing? And what will I change, if anything? Just those 3 questions. What's my plan? How am I doing? What will I change? Please leave us a comment. Let us know how you do metacognitive regulation in action, how you do some of your planning, or how you monitor your clinical actions, or how you evaluate what works. I'm looking forward to reading that. Please like and subscribe. It does help us, and we'll be going live soon. So look out for that, where we'll be looking at cognitive biases. So in the next episode, we'll be looking at the role of metacognition in learning. So just being able to absorb that information and how we engage with it and reflect on that information. I look forward to catching up with you then. I look forward to reading your comments, and we'll see you then. Thank you.